Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining today for the Count Us In webinar. We wanted to discuss the work we had done over almost a year at this point, talking about the 2030 upcoming census, disability data, and basically the American Community Survey, which is currently the only census-like data we have around disability. My name's Eric Buehlmann. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Public Policy here at the National Disability Rights Network. I am a white male with a blue suit, blue checkered shirt you can't really see, glasses, and at one point, usually blonde hair, but I think it's getting more gray as I get older. So there's that. This webinar will be about 90 minutes long. If you can change your name to have your name and your organization, that would be very helpful so we know who's going on and who's asking questions. If you could stay on mute, and then if you've got a question, if you could raise your hand and then you can unmute yourself, and we're going to have hopefully an extensive Q&A period near the end after the presentation. If you click the interpretation globe icon in the meeting controls toolbar, you can access the ASL services and an audio channel that's in Spanish. The link to the Spanish translation is going to be posted in the chat, and we also have English live captions available. It's really, we would love to get your feedback on a survey we're going to do at the end. If you could take a moment to fill that short survey out, it would be really helpful for us. It really helps us as we go forward with our webinars and our work in terms of how much we do and the way we provide the information in hopefully the most accessible way, and actually in the most informative way. So these are the feedback to these kinds of things is extremely critically important to us as we continue to strive to make our webinars and the information that we're putting out there better. And as I think you'll see as we go through this report, one of the things we're looking at is a training aspect around the 2030 census and disability going forward. And so the information and things you provide here are going to be helpful as we consider the best ways to do training and providing information to the community on these important topics as we go forward. So we really appreciate you being here today. We'd love for you all to, take some time, review the report, ask questions today, but this is not a one-time shot discussion. This is going to be an ongoing discussion that's going to be happening over the next couple of years on a variety of topics around federal data. So please take this opportunity to read the report, think about how you can get involved. Please continue to stay in touch with us, and let's continue working on this topic as we're going forward. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie Flint McKeven, who did the yeoman's work on this report. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Eric. And I do apologize, folks, for being off camera today. Ran into some technical difficulties actually logging in, so I am taking it through my phone, but hopefully folks can hear me okay. But sorry, folks cannot actually see me. But thank you so much, Eric. And hello, everyone. Like Eric said, welcome. I'm Stephanie Flint McKeven. Pronouns she, they, and I'm a public policy analyst with the National Disability Rights Network, where census and disability data issues are honestly one of my primary focuses. Before we get started, I really wanted to go ahead and take a moment and toss out a few thank yous for individuals who made not only today's presentation possible, but the report itself possible. First, I really wanted to thank Charles Endauer, who is our technical wizard, host with the most, our wonderful host today. He's hosting our webinar, and he also hosted the census count the disability data needs convening that we put on back in April with all of our folks. So another few folks I'd like to thank. I really wanted to thank Eric Buehlmann, who you just heard from, Alden Blevins, and Marlena Sayo for their contributions to this report. Truly couldn't have done it without them. And then I also wanted to give a very special thank you to our spring cohort of interns, Julianne Hawley, Madison Pope, Caleb Palmer, and Christy Collier, for documenting the rich conversations that actually took place during the convening breakout sessions. We were fortunate to have one of them in every single breakout session in order to try to get as full of a picture as we could. And then finally, last but not least, I really just wanted to say thank you to every single one of you. We have such a diverse group, such diverse representation of stakeholders today joining us, and your interest in supporting disability data and these the various things around that is exactly what makes conversations like this so incredibly meaningful. So I am so, so grateful that you're here and that you're taking the time to be here with us. And with that, let's go ahead and dive on in. Alden, if you could advance to slide 2, please. Okay, so our executive summary. Before we get into that, I just had a quick note. So when I was examining all of the notes from our convening and putting together the initial draft of this report, I realized, holy guacamole, this is such a wake up call for me. But as one of my amazing mentors always says, 2030 is going to be here before you know it. So at its core, this report is built around a straightforward idea. Accurate disability data matters, and so do the steps that we take to ensure disability populations are accurately represented in census surveys. With more accurate counts, people with disabilities are more likely to be fairly represented in federal decision making within our communities, and their communities are better positioned to receive the resources, services, and protections that we need not only to survive, but also to thrive in our communities. Collecting data actually goes far beyond the numbers themselves. Data itself drives funding decisions. Data itself shapes public policy. Data itself influences how services are planned and delivered. And in many ways, quality data is the foundation of effective advocacy. But improving disability data isn't something one organization itself or one agency or one individual can do alone. It requires ongoing collaboration among federal agencies, researchers, advocates, and of course, members of the disability community itself, because this is the community that we're focusing on in terms of surveying when it comes to gathering data here, and also accessibility of surveys. But only through these partnerships can disability data better reflect the lived experiences and also support policies that promote equity, inclusion, and full participation in census surveys. So that brings me to why this work is so crucial and so important in the first place. Next slide, please, Alden. Okay, so some background. So, for many years, the Census Bureau has identified people with disabilities as a hard to count population. And that designation has real consequences. And the reason it does is because census data, and especially disability data from the American Community Survey, influence everything. Lots of various things when it comes to policy, everything from funding, representation, resources for individuals with disabilities, community planning. Obviously, the decennial census is, similar in that regard, but just making sure that we have that accurate data. And when people with disabilities are undercounted or inadequately represented in these data sets, communities can receive fewer resources than they actually need. Existing disparities become harder and harder to identify and even harder to address at that point. So, understanding these challenges is not only crucial, but has also shaped much of NDRN's work over the past several years when it comes to census advocacy. Next slide, please. Okay, so NDRN's background in census data and data equity. So, through our work during the 2020 census, NDRN gained a much deeper understanding of both the progress that has been made as well as the challenges that still remain for disability data collection. In 2021, we published a report examining disability statistics and sometimes the lack of those statistics across the federal government and offered recommendations for how we can work together to improve how disability data is collected and utilized. And since late 2021, we've also remained active, very engaged in advocacy around census funding and around the ACS, as well as early planning efforts for the 2030 census. And those experiences actually laid the groundwork for the conversations that ultimately led to us wanting to hold space for a convening in April when it comes to disability data and the needs that we need. We wanted to follow up on the convening that took place in September of 2024, which brings me very nicely to the next slide, just to give folks a brief refresher, or for folks who didn't, know yet about what happened in 2023 to 2024 in terms of looking at the ACS question changes. And honestly, I think that this is a beautiful example of how a partnership did come together ultimately, because of the fact that there was, what have you. But on to the ACS question changes slide. So in October of 2023, the Census Bureau proposed changes to the disability questions used in the American Community Survey, or ACS. This proposal generated significant concern throughout the disability community. And as a result, in February of 2024, and we were so happy to see this, the Census Bureau announced that it would not be moving forward with those proposed changes until there had been meaningful engagement with the disability community. And that commitment led to an important partnership among several federal agencies, disability and civil rights organizations, who all came together to plan a national convening held in September of 2024. And going back to one of the major things that we got out of that convening, we know that this is not going to be our last conversation around these topics. We are going to continue to have these conversations, which was part of the reason that we wanted to convene, a safe space for folks. All right, so next slide, let's talk a little bit about our NDRN's convening that took place in April. So, this 6-hour convening brought together protection and advocacy organizations from across the country, researchers, and federal, state, and coalitions, as well as organizations. Participants spent time in both breakout sessions as well as larger group discussions, examining several important questions. We talked about why census and ACS data are so critical for disability policy, funding, and advocacy. And we also discussed the barriers that contribute to persistent disability undercounts and gaps in federal data collection, as well as accessibility of surveys for participants and accessible data for all researchers and advocates to better understand how they can best utilize this data. And so those conversations revealed several recurring themes that we will go over in a brief moment. But first, I want to cover some obstacles and a few overarching observations from our participants. Next slide, please. Okay, so addressing those obstacles that I was telling you all about. So, participants didn't just identify challenges, they also focused on active solutions and tangible solutions. And one reoccurring recommendation that we got was the importance of using trusted community messengers to improve participation. We also heard about the need for culturally competent outreach that reflects the diversity of the disability communities that we serve. Participants also consistently emphasize that helping people understand why participating matters that completing census or federal surveys actually does make a difference, and it does directly affect how resources are allocated within the communities. And then those discussions naturally led to us kind of talking through those key findings and key themes that we ended up that we are going to talk about now, but that are also presented in our report. So I promised you we'd get to it. So let's get to it. Next slide, please. So the first category of findings focuses on data systems themselves. So participants repeatedly in their discussion groups, as well as in the larger discussions, emphasize that disability data drives funding, policy, and services. But at the same time, they highlighted ongoing problems with undercounting, persistent data gaps, and the importance of capturing intersectional identities as well. Finally, many participants discussed limitations in current disability question design and how these limitations um, limitations can affect the usefulness and the quality of data that's collected. Now, of course, strong data systems are only part of the equation here. Participation itself remains a major, major, major challenge. So, with that being said, we're going to go to our next slide and we are going to talk about participation barriers here. So, participants described a variety of obstacles that prevent people from participating in the census and other federal surveys. Trust is a huge thing that ended up emerging as one of the most significant issues that marginalized communities are currently experiencing and they're currently facing. Some communities have concerns about privacy or government data collection, while others encounter accessibility barriers or simply have not been reached out to through traditional outreach efforts. So, addressing these barriers will require both stronger communication and stronger relationships between government agencies and disability communities. Even with better participation, however, we also need advocates who are equipped to use the data effectively to influence policy change in a tangible and actionable way. Next slide, please. So we are on to our last category. So another major overarching theme that was centered were advocacy capacity needs and challenges. Participants emphasized the need for more localized data that reflects the realities in their communities. They also reminded us that data alone rarely changes policy. Numbers become more powerful, and we've seen this time and time again. Numbers become more powerful when they're paired with personal stories or narratives with lived experience included in those stories and narratives. And finally, many organizations expressed a need for additional training and technical assistance to strengthen their own data literacy and to build capacity for data driven advocacy. These findings directly informed the recommendations that we have in our report, and we are going to go to the first slide of recommendations. We actually made recommendations for, lots of different groups on this call. So we all have a role to play here, and that's really the overarching theme of these recommendations. So we'll go to the next slide for the recommendations on the census for the Census Bureau. So our first category of recommendations are for the Census Bureau. Based on the conversations and previously covered themes, we feel that there should be a focus on improving both data quality and accessibility. This includes modernizing disability question design, expanding intersectional data collection, continuing partnerships with trusted community organizations, as well as national and state disability and civil rights organizations, improving accessibility throughout the census operations. And what that means is looking like going beyond Section 508 compliance to ensure full compatibility and usability for everyone. and also increasing the availability of a small area, and rural data, disability data. So together, we feel like these recommendations aim to produce a more accurate, representative, and useful disability data that all types of groups are able to utilize. But we also know that researchers as well have a very important role to play here. Next slide. Okay, so our recommendations for researchers in the report. So researchers can strengthen disability data by prioritizing community engaged research that includes disabled people throughout the research processes. We also encourage more actionable state and local analysis, expanding research on intersectionality, and translating research findings into clear, public facing narratives in partnership with advocates that policymakers and communities can easily understand or maybe even relate to. Finally, building partnerships that improve data literacy among advocates can also help ensure research is translated too into meaningful action as well. Advocates ourselves also have a very unique role to play as well. Next slide, please. So, our recommendations for advocates. So, firstly, advocates are often, a lot of folks know this, that advocates are often balancing data and our lived experiences in working to ensure, um, you know, uh, good, credible advocacy and making sure that, that advocacy is communicated well. So, pairing statistics with personal narratives, developing localized communication strategies, and investing in data literacy and technical capacity will definitely increase that among advocates. Advocates can also lead. Advocates can also lead community trust building efforts, continue to help push for more inclusive federal data systems, and of course, begin preparing now for what we hope becomes a coordinated national disability count campaign leading into 2030. Of course, meaningful change also requires leadership at the federal level as well. So that said, we are going to go to our next slide of recommendations. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So recommendations for federal departments, Congress, and the administration. So we recommend creating and coordinating a federal disability data modernization initiative, ensuring meaningful disability community engagement throughout data development, investing in community based census infrastructure, strengthening disability data reporting requirements, protecting privacy while building public trust, and expanding funding for state and local disability data capacity and data needs. These investments would help build a stronger, more equitable disability data ecosystem for years to come. Now that brings us to our closing thoughts on the report. Next slide, please. So, the conversations captured in this report reinforce a simple but very powerful reality. Disability data really and truly matters. And I know that we all believe that on this call. It influences how resources are distributed, it influences how policies are written, it influences how programs are evaluated, and ultimately how people with disabilities are represented in decisions that affect our everyday lives. But at the same time, persistent undercounting limitations in current data collection and participation barriers and gaps in data literacy continue to limit our understanding of disability in America. But the good news is that we know many of the steps needed to improve these systems. But the disability community and civil rights communities cannot afford to wait until the next decennial census in order to begin addressing these challenges. We cannot afford to wait until 2030 or 2029 to address these challenges. Preparation for 2030 starts now, and it's going to require continued partnerships, meaningful participation, and authentic representation across every single stage of the process. We can go ahead and stop the recording. I want to thank everybody for all of your time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. We'll also go ahead and cycle over to slide 16 so that folks have my contact information in case you think of a question, or, want to, would like to talk with me a little bit further about the report.
Thank you,
And
Stephanie.
then, okay, perfect. Thank you, Eric. And do we have any questions, hands up, anything in the chat?
Well, there was one thing in the chat that I was going to see if Alden might be able to answer, which is where can we locate the report?
Yes, absolutely. It is available on NDRN's website at ndrn.org. I can go ahead and drop the link to that in the chat.
And we will also make sure to send that link out to all of the participants after this call, just to make sure that everybody has a copy of the report.
No problem, Amy. Are there any other questions? And questions do not necessarily need to be necessarily a question about the report, but you can also think of this in a broader context of questions about how you can participate, how you can make sure that your community is actually participating in the census, or concerns that you may have.
Yeah, and comments are also welcome. We wanted to keep this presentation brief so that we could, have discussion, because we really do want folks' feedback. We really, want this to be a continued starting point, if you will, for these discussions. So please, by all means, don't be shy.
Mia also sent a hearty congratulations for your work on this important call to action. So I wanted to let you know that, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you. We're glad to do it.
So Kira from the Census Bureau asked, have you considered expanding this work to include key census surveys between the decennial that ask questions about disability, like the American Community Survey? Thank you for your work on this.
My gosh, of course. Thank you, Kira. Really good question. So yes, so right now at this point, we have been focusing our efforts on census and accessibility there, but also we are hoping to focus our efforts too on looking closer at the disability questions, as a collective, hopefully in terms of that. So those are some things that we are planning to do a little bit more closely, but definitely something that's in the back of our mind. And of course, welcome the Bureau's partnership, whatever that looks like whatever that looks like in that way. So thank you so much for that great question.
And I think I would add into that we've been also trying to think about how we educate the community about all these different surveys and things that are out there and why it's important. So it's not just the census side that we're looking at, but we're looking at a number of different surveys that are done that track data, and making sure that the disability community sort of understands that there are many important things that are out there. Gotta make sure I can see this. Deborah Weinberg, how do we address data collection concerns for communities / people who have been historically placed on lists and persecuted based on them?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult question. And I'll be honest, I definitely don't have all the answers. But I think that also covers that culturally competent outreach, right? It doesn't just, when I say culturally competent outreach, what I mean is it's a very broad thing. So, for example, when it comes to reaching out to those folks, it might require trauma informed outreach, right? Individuals who are culturally competent, but also, really understand, really validate where they're coming from, but also kind of work, as much as we can to, talk about why these are so crucial and so important. And I'll be honest, we are still working on messaging around that to make sure that we are kind of being sensitive to that when it comes to the census and federal data. I know that that's something that, we've been thinking about here at NDRN as well as a lot of our civil rights partners as well. So thank you so much for the question.
And I think that involves a lot of open conversations and discussions so that, we understand the issues that we may not necessarily be exposed to and are going.
Mhm.
So this is where having this broad network of people we're talking to so that we're getting as much information as humanly possible so that we can make the right statements, the right fact sheets, the right outreach, those kinds of things. Lisa from Disability Rights Ohio asked, of course, the most important question: is there a discussion board on Elevate, which is our learning management system, Recensus? The short answer is not right now, but the plan is yes.
Yes.
Then Vanessa, I'm sorry, Restovic from Access Lab and PAOH. There are several health disability groups also working on an inclusive and accurate definition of disability. I'm sure they'd want to team up.
Yes.
My short answer to that would be reach out to Stephanie.
Yeah, please. We love collaboration here, clearly.
I'm not sure which Noelle was saying definitely true to, but she definitely said true to something else. Amy from HSRI, yes, HSRI is one of them working on IDD specific information. Amy, please reach out to us. We'd love to connect.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Feel free to reach out to me directly. And if that's super helpful in that sense, just because we put our contact information on the slide, just so it might be easier if folks are able to reach out directly. But if you do put your email in the chat, I can make sure that I get it after this webinar and I can reach out to you directly too. So whatever is going to work best.
I'm typing yours in right now, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you.
No problem. And then Amy, to piggyback on Deborah's question, what about folks in institutional settings?
That is a very good one. And that's something that we've definitely been very focused on as well. And I think that that's also one of the things that we are trying to figure out, because we know first and foremost that institutions are one of the places where a lot of the undercount really and truly does occur for various reasons. So definitely something that we are considering in the back of our mind, and definitely something that we are considering when it comes to our accessibility get out the count plan for 2030, or excessive disability count campaign, rather.
And there had been a little bit of work that had been done on that in 2020 about trying to connect the disability community with Census and the people doing the counts to make sure that they had all the different institutional settings and understanding where the settings, these settings were, so that they were reaching out to them properly and getting the full count there. But I think it also involves us making sure that the institutions have an important role in filling out the requests they get.
100%. Are there any other questions or comments? You're welcome to post in the chat, but you're also welcome to come off of mute as well, or raise your hand, whatever is easiest and most accessible for you.
Oops. I am not seeing anything else right now, Stephanie.
Okay.
And I'm happy to give people back time if they don't necessarily have another comment. I'll share this link that Amy sent to us from HSRI.
Okay, wonderful.
Stephanie, I've got a copy.
Okay, awesome.
Oops, now we got another link. Cool. Okay.
We love that. Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Please, as we said earlier, look over the report. And we want this to be the beginning of a collaboration because this, as Stephanie very much laid out, this is a critically important topic, and it involves all of us sort of coming together and trying to work. And we're really trying to start early, and make sure that, we're not waiting until 2028, 2029 as we're leading right into the 2030 census. We're trying to lay the groundwork now and get people interested in understanding this, not just for the every 10-year census, but that there are a lot of different data points out there and that they should be involved in this, and how best we can make sure that that's being done. So we appreciate everyone's interest in this today. We look forward to working with you over the next couple of years, and we know the census is going to continue past that. But thank you for all your time, and please just reach out to us with any thoughts, ideas, and anything you may have.
Absolutely. Thank y'all.